This is not just another case. This is not just another missing child lost in the shuffle of headlines. This is Emmanuel Haro, a baby who didn't even live long enough to know what safety truly felt like. A child who should be alive today, laughing, playing, growing, but instead his name is bound in whispers of suspicion, fear, and silence. And if you've followed this case, you know the silence isn't accidental. Rebecca, Emmanuel's mother, spoke before he vanished. She cried out warnings. She noticed Jake's temper, his secrecy, his distance. She felt something dangerous building inside her own home. But when she cried, no one listened, not the neighbors, not the authorities, not even those who should have stood by her side. And now Emmanuel is gone. On the other side stands Jake, the father, a man who should have been Emmanuel's shield, his protector. But instead of leading the search, instead of breaking down in tears, instead of pleading for his son's safe return, he stayed silent. No urgency, no desperation, just a chilling calm. And sometimes silence screams louder than words. Sometimes silence is the biggest confession of all. So we must ask the question that nobody dares to. If Rebecca cried and Jake said nothing, and Emmanuel vanished, who really failed him? Was it Jake's shadow, heavy and dangerous? Was it a system that ignored Rebecca's pleas? Or was it all of us for letting this cycle of neglect and silence repeat itself in case after case? DetectiveMax isn't here for clicks. We're here for justice. And let me say this clearly. We will not stop. We will not grow quiet. We will not let Emmanuel's name fade into another unsolved file in a drawer. This channel is here to stay. We fight until the end. And we will not rest until justice is grounded, until the silence is broken, until the truth about what happened to Emmanuel Haro comes crashing into the light. Because silence is what Jake is counting on. Silence is how justice dies. And if we stay silent, then we too become guilty. So the question tonight isn't just what happened to Emmanuel. It's whether you will stand with us, break the silence, and fight for justice for a baby who cannot fight for himself. Stay with me because we uncover Emmanuel, the heart of the case, pure innocence stolen. Rebecca, the ignored prophet, crying out, silenced. Jake, the shadow, his silence painted as damning. The system and community complicit, failure to act. DetectiveMax, the relentless fighter, not for clicks, but for justice. Here to stay until truth is uncovered. If hearing this makes you uncomfortable, good, it should. Because babies don't just disappear, lies do. But before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel if you believe in fighting for justice. Because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice for those who cannot fight for themselves. We've just crossed 4,000 subscribers, all because of your support. And we need that same energy to reach 5,000, then 6,000, and then 10,000. So go ahead and drop your fingerprints on that subscribe button and where you watching from, because wherever you are, the day this vision is fulfilled, I will send my appreciation straight to you. Let's keep building this community that fights for justice together. When we strip this case down to its bare bones, 3 things stand out immediately. First, a baby is missing. His name is Emmanuel Haro. Second, a mother, Rebecca, made statements that now sound like warnings we all failed to hear. And third, new enhanced photos of the father, Jake Haro, are surfacing, and with them, a storm of suspicion that refuses to die down. Let's start with the basics. Emmanuel disappeared under circumstances that don't add up. Rebecca recalls moments, fragments, details of that day, but they clash with Jake's silence and vague answers. Where was Jake? What exactly did he do in those crucial hours? And why do his actions not align with the urgency of a father whose baby is gone? Now we have these enhanced photos of Jake, not just still images, but windows into behavior, his body language, his composure, his refusal to show panic. These aren't just pictures, they are clues, and clues speak louder than words when someone chooses silence. So here's the question we must confront. Are we looking at a father devastated by loss, or a man concealing what he knows? Did Rebecca cry out because she sensed the truth before it unfolded? And if Jake's shadow stretches over this case, why has it taken so long for the system to acknowledge it? In this episode, we are going deeper than headlines. We will lay out the timeline, peel back the layers of Rebecca's testimony, expose the inconsistencies in Jake's behavior, and confront the uncomfortable truth that the disappearance of Emmanuel Haro may not be random at all. And if Jake's hand is truly behind this, then justice delayed is justice denied. DetectiveMax doesn't deal in speculation. We deal in evidence, verified accounts, and hard questions. And the hard question right now is this: if Rebecca's cries were the first alarm, and Jake's silence is the second, why is Emmanuel still missing, and why has no one been held accountable? Let's ground this in what we know. Not speculation, not rumors, but verified details that law enforcement has placed on the record. On the night of Emmanuel Haro's disappearance, Rebecca reported her baby missing. That date is etched into the timeline, the day her world collapsed. According to her initial statements, she noticed Jake's behavior growing stranger in the days leading up to Emmanuel vanishing. Shorter temper, increased secrecy, and a distance that weighed heavily on her. Then came her cry, almost a plea, but nobody acted on it. Law enforcement's involvement began immediately after the disappearance was reported. Officers took statements, but those statements, Rebecca's in particular, painted a picture that should have triggered deeper suspicion. While she expressed concern, even fear, Jake remained quiet, detached. And yet, no immediate red flag seemed to stop the case from slipping into confusion. Search warrants were later executed, targeting the Haro residence, surrounding properties, and even digital records. These aren't rumors, they are documented actions. K-9 units combed the area, volunteers poured in, helicopters scanned from above, and yet the most haunting fact remains: nothing concrete was found. Every lead turned cold. Every effort ended in silence. And here's where we must stop and think: how does a baby disappear into thin air? How do hours of search efforts, warrants, and manpower yield nothing? Could it be that Emmanuel never wandered off, never got lost, never slipped away unnoticed, but instead was taken? If so, then the logical question follows: who had the access, the opportunity, and the motive? These aren't just details for a file. These are the pillars of Emmanuel's story: a missing child, a mother's cries, a father's silence, and a system that scrambled but still came up empty. And when facts clash with silence, it's the silence we must interrogate. Now let's talk about something that every seasoned investigator watches closely: a witness or parent whose story begins to shift. At first, Rebecca's statements to law enforcement painted a picture of fear and suspicion. She spoke about Jake's temper, his secrecy, his dismissive behavior. In her own words, she made it clear that something about him unsettled her. Those cries were chilling, almost prophetic in hindsight. But then something happened. Rebecca's tone changed. The words that once carried sharp edges of fear suddenly softened. Inconsistencies began to surface. Details she once pressed hard on became blurry. Her suspicion toward Jake seemed to evaporate. And worse, she stopped cooperating altogether. Now, as investigators, we have to ask, why would a mother who once raised alarms about the father suddenly grow silent? What forces could push her into retreat? Was it fear of Jake, pressure from outside influences, or perhaps something deeper: guilt, manipulation, or even complicity? And here's where the case stalled. The moment Rebecca shifted, the momentum of the investigation collapsed. Police hit a wall, search efforts turned cold. Without her cooperation, every theory turned into a dead end. And that stall wasn't just procedural, it was emotional. A baby was missing, the mother withdrew, and the father remained in the shadows of silence. This isn't speculation, this is the documented trajectory of the case. Rebecca cried out, then she pulled back. And in that silence, Emmanuel's case lost its lifeline. Because in missing persons investigations, time is everything. Every hour matters, every detail counts. And when a key witness shuts down, it's not just a setback, it's a signal. A signal that something, or someone, is controlling the narrative. So the question is, did Rebecca's change of story come from her own choice? Or was it forced upon her by fear, intimidation, or manipulation? Because silence doesn't just happen in these cases. Silence is shaped. When a child disappears, the reaction of the parents is always under the microscope. We don't expect perfection. Grief looks different for everyone, but we do expect urgency, transparency, and a desperate fight to bring the child home. Yet in Jake's case, what we've seen is something very different. Instead of frontline pleas for his son's return, instead of begging the public for help, Jake has leaned heavily on his legal defense. Through his attorneys, he's painted himself not as a father devastated by loss, but as a man cornered, threatened, and targeted. His legal team claims he's received death threats. They insist he cannot speak publicly, for fear of his own safety. But let's pause for a moment. Death threats are tragic, yes, but does fear for your own life silence the cry for your missing child? Does it erase the need to scream Emmanuel's name from every rooftop, to push past cameras, to demand answers? Most parents would take every risk imaginable if it meant their child had a chance of being found. So why not Jake? His silence has become deafening. And when silence replaces urgency, it raises suspicion. Rebecca cried. She spoke. She feared. Jake said nothing. Not a plea, not a press conference, not a single desperate appeal for the safe return of his son. And in the world of criminal investigation, we know one thing. Silence can be louder than words. It speaks of calculation. It speaks of legal strategy. Sometimes it even speaks of guilt. Now let's be fair. Jake's attorneys argue that the media frenzy has created a hostile environment, that anything he says could be twisted, and that protecting him is essential. But isn't the point here not Jake's protection, but Emmanuel's? Isn't the focus supposed to be a missing baby, not a father shielding himself behind a wall of silence and legal paperwork? We can't ignore this. When a father retreats from the spotlight at the very moment his child needs it most, the world notices, the public notices, and law enforcement notices too. And that absence of voice is itself a statement. So here's the chilling question we must wrestle with. Is Jake silent because he is innocent and afraid, or is he silent because he knows speaking the wrong word might unravel everything? Either way, his silence has become the loudest sound in this case. When a child goes missing, law enforcement knows time is the enemy. Every hour matters. Every step matters. And in Emmanuel's case, investigators quickly realized that this wasn't just a case of a child wandering off. This had the markings of something far darker. Within days, warrants were deployed. Not just for Jake and Rebecca's home, but for vehicles, digital devices, and even secondary locations connected to their movements. K-9 units were brought in, sweeping every corner of the house, every inch of the yard, and nearby wooded areas. These dogs are trained to detect even the faintest scent, and their search results can often make or break an investigation. Helicopters scanned from above, thermal imaging combing the fields and riverbanks for any trace of Emmanuel. Teams of officers and volunteers spread out in grid patterns, methodical, exhaustive, searching not just for the child, but for anything. A blanket, a bottle, a single footprint. Yet nothing tangible emerged. Behind the scenes, the warrants went deeper. Investigators pulled phone records, message logs, surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras. They wanted to see who went where, who called whom, and what movements were logged in the hours before Emmanuel vanished. Forensics became the silent witness. Fingerprints, trace evidence, and digital footprints, all under scrutiny. The focus began to crystallize. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was targeted. And every piece of evidence, every search warrant, seemed to circle back to the same unsettling truth. The answer to Emmanuel's disappearance was not outside the home, but inside it. And while the warrants uncovered fragments, inconsistencies in timelines, unexplained gaps, behavior that didn't match the grieving parent's script, what they did not uncover was the one thing Emmanuel needed most: his location. It was as if the child had been swallowed by silence itself. The tragedy here is haunting. Massive resources deployed, dozens of officers mobilized, a community on edge, and still, nothing. Not a sound, not a trace, not a clue that could break the case wide open. And that begs the most painful question. Did Jake have both the time, the knowledge and the rage to make Emmanuel vanish so thoroughly that even the most advanced searches came up empty? Now here's where the story takes a turn. Not in the courtroom, not in the search grids, but online. A set of images began circulating. They were called enhanced photos of Jake. Sharpened, zoomed, digitally altered, to bring out details people claimed were being ignored. But here's the truth. The origin of these images is murky. Law enforcement has never officially confirmed them. No press release has authenticated them. And yet they've become part of the public conversation, feeding the fire of suspicion. Why? Because in cases like this, perception often runs faster than proof. These so-called enhanced visuals claim to capture Jake in moments that don't sit right with the timeline, shadows in the background, movements that seem too casual for a father of a missing child, expressions that many described as cold. But remember, an image can be twisted, frozen in time, stripped of context. A look on someone's face isn't evidence, but in the court of public opinion, it can feel like a verdict. And that's the danger here. Because when facts stall, rumors rush in to fill the silence. Rebecca's cry for help, Jake's silence, and now these photos, circulating like a ghostly confirmation of guilt. Whether real or fabricated, whether accurate or exaggerated, they shape how the public sees this man. They whisper, "What is Jake hiding?" even when the evidence remains unverified. And this is where the tragedy doubles down. A missing child deserves clarity. But Emmanuel's case is caught in a storm of fact versus speculation, evidence versus rumor. And yet, ask yourself, if the community hadn't started digging, would these questions have been raised at all? Or would silence once again have buried Emmanuel's name under the weight of secrecy? When the so-called enhanced photos surfaced, the community didn't stay quiet, they exploded. Social media timelines flooded with side-by-side comparisons, captions accusing Jake, threads dissecting his every movement. Suddenly Emmanuel's disappearance wasn't just a case, it became a spectacle. Local media jumped in, amplifying the noise. Talk shows posed the question, did Rebecca's cries predict this? Opinion pieces ran headlines, painting Jake as the silent figure at the center of a storm. And while journalists are trained to report, not convict, the undertone was clear. The public already had its suspect. But here's the real weight. Once the media machine picks up a case, pressure multiplies. Every neighbor feels entitled to whisper. Every Facebook group claims to have a theory. And the danger? Justice gets shaped not by evidence in the courtroom, but by speculation in the comments section. This isn't just a missing child anymore. It's a tug of war between facts and emotions, with Emmanuel's name being pulled apart in the middle. And maybe that's why Rebecca's cries sting even louder now. Because she spoke, she warned. She cried out her observation of Jake before her baby vanished. And now the world is finally listening, but listening too late. When Emmanuel is still gone, and the questions are piling up faster than the answers. Let's slow down. Let's take the badge approach. Strip away the noise, the speculation, the media frenzy. What we're left with is a timeline. And in any missing person case, the timeline doesn't just matter, it is the case. Emmanuel's disappearance is pinned on a critical window, the hours before Rebecca cried out her fear, and the moment Jake fell silent. A detective sees those as markers, as bookends of behavior. Rebecca's side emotional, erratic, shifting in her statements. Some would say her voice sounds like panic. Others would argue it sounds like guilt. But in law enforcement, changing stories raise flags, not because they prove guilt, but because they reveal fear of exposure. What was she shielding? Was it herself, or someone else? Now Jake the opposite. His silence screams. No emotional pleas, no public breakdown, no cooperation with the camera lens that might soften him in the eyes of the public. Instead, lawyers speak for him. Silence in a case like this isn't just quiet, it's calculated. It says, I'm protecting myself, not my missing child. Behaviorally, the contrast couldn't be sharper. One parent cries out, the other shuts down. A detective doesn't ignore that. We map it, we cross-check it. We ask whose behavior aligns with motive, whose choices align with opportunity. And when we talk motive, we're not chasing TV drama. We're asking the hard questions. Did Emmanuel's disappearance serve to silence conflict? Did it erase a problem inside that home? Was this about control, anger, or desperation? These gaps in time, in behavior and motive, are where detectives dig. Because when a child vanishes, coincidences rarely exist. And in this case, the gaps aren't just holes in the story, they are screaming voids. Voids that point back, again and again, to the people closest to Emmanuel. When a child vanishes, detectives are trained to expand, not narrow, in the early stages. Every possibility stays on the table until the facts eliminate it. Emmanuel's case is no different. So let's unpack the three dominant theories, and weigh them against what we actually know. 1. The stranger abduction theory. The most terrifying to any parent, a random predator. In many cases, this is where communities first look. But Emmanuel's case raises challenges here. There were no confirmed witnesses, no credible sightings, no surveillance hits suggesting a stranger scooped him up. No tire tracks, no strange vehicles reported with consistency. Law enforcement scoured the immediate area with K9s and came up empty. That doesn't make it impossible, but stranger abductions are rare, and without supporting evidence, this theory weakens under scrutiny. 2. The staged abduction theory. This theory suggests that one or both parents may have staged the scene to appear as if Emmanuel was taken. Detectives consider this when stories shift, when behavior doesn't match panic, and when timelines feel manufactured. Rebecca's changing statements feed this suspicion. Jake's silence feeds it further. If the disappearance was staged, the motive could range from hiding an accident, to escaping accountability, to masking deeper family turmoil. The lack of forced entry, the absence of outside evidence, these factors strengthen the possibility. 3. Familial involvement. The darker path. This is the theory no one wants to say out loud, but detectives can't afford to ignore. Someone in Emmanuel's immediate world may have been directly involved. Statistically, when young children vanish, family members or close contacts account for the majority of cases. Rebecca's warnings about Jake, her later contradictions, and Jake's cold silence all form shadows that hang over this possibility. Add in search warrants targeting the home, digital devices, and personal property, and you see why investigators' attention kept circling back to Emmanuel's parents. At this point, here's the hard truth. The evidence we know doesn't lean toward a stranger. It doesn't fully support a random snatch and grab. Instead, the weight of the inconsistencies, the behavioral red flags, and the timeline gaps all funnel us back inside that home. And as detectives will tell you, sometimes the hardest theory to confront is the one closest to the crib. Emmanuel Haro didn't disappear into thin air. Every unanswered question, every ignored warning, every silent moment brings us closer to the chilling reality. Someone knew more than they let on. And if Rebecca's cries were unheard, if Jake's silence persists, then justice remains out of reach. This is why DetectiveMax is here. Not for clicks, not for headlines, but to fight until the end. We will not be quiet. We will not let silence bury the truth. And we will not stop until Emmanuel's story is answered and justice is grounded. If you believe Emmanuel deserves a voice, if you refuse to let this case fade into obscurity, join us. Subscribe to DetectiveMax. Share this story. Speak out. Because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice for those who cannot fight for themselves.